bare cable. And for you non-technical people, 52 bare cable run by the KGB is a big deal. And we had a copy of that. Everything was on that cable for 3.5 years. And so I put the tape on and turned it on. The guy said, "Oh, you know how to run this stuff?" I said, "Yeah, I didn't learn it." The thing, it dawned on me why they recruited me. They had this source of information, and I mean major source of information, so we had a lot of people working on this. And I looked around the room, which was about twice as big as this area, and there was about 30 people there. And among the 30 people, there was about 6 or 7 young ladies, which of course I was very interested in since I had just gotten out of the army and I was 21 years old. So I immediately started a conversation with one of them who happened to be Bevs. And then we ran around together for about a year, and then her sister, I introduced her sister to my roommate, and they ended up getting married. So the four of us,
That's my parents.
Your parent, okay.
the four of us ran around together for the rest of the term, and the project ended after a length of 3.5 years. So then Bev and her sister decided they were going to go back home. Well, I had already started school, and jobs were not easy to come by in those days, so I decided to stay there, and I did. And so they went home, and I never saw Bev again. So 40 years went by. 40 years. So, hi there. I retired from CIA and went to IBM. Worked there for 3 years, got recalled back to the agency. And I walked in my office one morning, and the guy told me, and I said, "Can I help you?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "You tired?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "I just spent the weekend in Tucson with my aunt." And he said, "She said she knows you." And when I came back from IBM, I was assigned a different task, and then I ended up teaching a course that I developed. Taught the course for 6 years. So I went through a lot of people. And I said, "Okay, what's your name?" He gives me this name, I never heard of this. And I said, "I don't know that person." He said, "Well, she sure knows you." And I said, then he said, "Oh, that's her married name. Her maiden name was Simmons." I almost fell out of the chair. So he gave me her phone number, and I talked to her. And then a couple of very interesting things happened. I was working a project for NSA, and I had to go to Denver. It was the only place in the country we could find a 5,000 foot long fiber optic cable that had no breaks in it. And that was the requirement, that was the NSA requirement, that we perform tests on that type of cable. So we had to go to Denver. We rented a 5,000 foot fiber optic cable from Quest. Those of you who live around here know who Quest is. So you can imagine what the cost of that cable was. Anyway, we ran the test finished. I called her up and I said, "Hey, I'm in Denver, and as I told you, we're gonna finish noon on Wednesday. How about if I come to Tucson?" She said, "Sure." So I get on a plane and go to Tucson. And for those of you who know about the big room at the airport where you come in when you land on the plane, I walked in there and I'm looking around, there's like 100 people in there. And I haven't seen this woman in 40 years, and I thought, I don't even know if I know her or not. I'm gonna recognize her or not. So I did another scan, this time I did a very slow scan. And I saw this woman looking at me. And I looked at her and I walked over and said, Bev, she said, John, I said, bingo. So we stood there and talked for probably half an hour. And the very interesting part that I will never forget is that I gave her a big hug and it felt just like it did 40 years ago. So we spent the next 2 days here, and I went back to Washington, back to work, and 2 weeks later, my boss called me, and my boss was a female writer of software, and she was very good at what she did. She said, we have a problem. You want to use a certain system on NSA's, and CIA had a requirement that I was working on to automatically download keying material for crypto systems. And NSA didn't want to do that. So NSA designed a system to work that problem, and so did Motorola. And my boss asked me what system I liked. I said Motorola. It worked. NSA system does not work. So she said, okay, go find out what's wrong with it and fix it. So the problem was in San Antonio, Texas. So I called Bev and I said, hey, I have to go to San Antonio for 2 weeks. I'd like to go with me. She said, really? I said, yeah. She said, okay, give me an hour, call me back. I said, okay. So I called her back in an hour and I said, well, she said, I'm ready. She said, I got a ticket. She said, I'm getting to the airport at 3:05. I said, I'm getting there at 3:07. I'll meet you at the airport. Fine. So we had a great 2 weeks where we spent most of the time catching up on where we've both been for the last 40 years. And we finished that conversation, and I asked my boss, I fixed the problem in San Antonio, and I said, do I have to, I only took 2 days to find the problem and fix it. So I said, can I stay the rest of the 2 weeks? He said, yeah, you have to. I said, good. So that worked out very well. We had a great hotel, great motel, and we did the river walk and all that kind of stuff. And I went back to Washington, she came back to Tucson. Well, probably a month later, I'm doing my thing and working on this test of a new crypto system. And the way it works is we had 3 different teams doing exactly the same thing, determining the cryptologic depth of this new box and whether it was capable of handling the volume from the satellite we had orbited. And so anyway, the bottom line is all 3 teams have to end up with the same exact number or they start all over. So Mr. 3-piece suit walks in the office and says to me, "You Tireman?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, I'm from the office." I said, "So is everybody else around here. What do you want?" He said, "Well, I'm from President Clinton's office." I said, "Okay. What do you want?" He said, "Well, my job is cost cutting." And he said, I've identified you and your task as a cost cutting effort. And he said, "I'm going to take half your project money and half your people." I said, "Okay." I said, "How much of my responsibility are you going to take?" He said, "That's your problem." So I get up, walked around my desk, put my nose about that far from his, and I said, "Woods." And I walked out. Walked down the hall to my boss and said, "As of this second, this minute, this day, this year, I'm done." And I walked out the door. And I went down to a 7-Eleven and I called Bev and I said, "Hey, how'd you like a visitor for a while?" And she said, "What's going on?" I said, "I just quit my job." She said, okay, where are you? I said, I'm about 2 miles from Dulles Airport, and I got everything on my own in my beat up old pickup truck, and I'll drive to Tucson. I said, I don't know how long I'll take to get there, but that's what I'll do. She said, I'll catch the midnight flight and drive across the country with you. So she did.
Beverly.
She did, and we did, and we had a great trip. It took us 6 days to get across the country. So I got to Tucson the second time, and the next morning we're sitting there and the phone rings, and she answered the phone and said, it's for you. I said, how the hell can it be for me? Nobody knows where I am. She said, obviously somebody does. So it was Motorola, and Motorola, some guy in Motorola wants me to come up there and have a chat. He said, just a half an hour. Well, just half an hour turned into almost 4 hours. And I hired on with Motorola as a consultant for the next year. So, but I couldn't work on it full time. Motorola had a rule, no new hires, but they could hire consultants. So every Sunday afternoon, Bev and I would get in her car and drive to Phoenix. And I said, you know where McDowell Avenue is? She said, yeah. Big shopping center there.
Yeah, exactly, that's it.
So we'd go up there and I'd go to work Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, and she'd go to the shopping center and spend her time there. It's a big deal, shopping center, movies and all that stuff there. So we did that for about a year. In the meantime, we bought this house. And we decided that we would do a lot of things to this house. And we start working on it. And Motorola said, hey, tell you what, how about we'll set you up with a PC and you can stay in your house and work. We'll send you the stuff and you can work on it and send it back to us. I said, it's okay with me. Many times I'd sat there working problems, and I'm sitting there in my pajamas. I thought that was pretty cool. Never been able to do that before. So anyway, that was how I met. And then I guess we were here, I was here in Tucson with Bev for maybe a month, and Suzanne and Sandy came down. No, Suzanne did by herself. And we were talking, we were going to get married, and Suzanne, Bev had sent out invitations to a flock of her people. I didn't know anybody here, not one soul. And so Bev sent these invitations out, and these people answered with, oh, not the 14th, how about some other day? And after about 5 or 6 people said that, Suzanne said, what are you doing? Why don't you just come to Montana and we'll get married up there? So that's what we did. And it worked out very well. We got married in a place called Red Lodge, which is about 50 miles from Billings. And it's near the north entrance to the park. So a beautiful place. You could walk out 50 feet from this gazebo she had alongside her house where she performed the ceremony. And you walk 50 feet that way and you're in the middle of a small road that you could look up the side of the mountain, and it's the entrance to the park. And if you walk 50 feet the other way, there's a major creek running down behind the park from the snow that melted. Beautiful place. So that was where we got married. Then we went to Suzanne's house. Suzanne had to build a new house right outside of Billings, and we had the reception there. And then after that, we spent a couple of days there and came back to Tucson. And we've been here ever since. And that's my story.
That's a story worthy of late television, no doubt.
Who needs a drink? A water or a Diet Coke or?
Diet Coke would be